The Cotswold mist clung to the weathered stone walls of the workshop like a damp wool blanket, muting the sharp morning bird call. Inside, 54-year-old Arthur "Artie" Thorne moved with the quiet gravity of a man who understood the rhythmic language of forgotten machinery. His heavy tan leather work boots clicked with a deliberate, grounding thud against the uneven cobblestone floor, a sound that echoed softly off the ancient oak rafters. He paused, the stiff navy canvas of his apron brushing against his indigo denim jeans as he adjusted his thick-rimmed tortoiseshell safety glasses. Artie smoothed his salt and pepper hair, neatly undercut, and checked the trim of his short, well-groomed beard. A thin shaft of pale morning light pierced through a high, grime-streaked window, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the stagnant air. Artie's breath was a soft, steady cadence in the cool air. He reached out a weathered hand, the grease lines etched into his knuckles like a map of his long career, and pulled back the heavy, dust-caked canvas tarp. Beneath lay the skeletal remains of a 1964 Jaguar. It was a cadaver of oxidized steel, its once proud silhouette surrendered to decades of neglect in a leaky barn. To an untrained eye, it was merely expensive scrap. To Artie, it was a slumbering masterpiece waiting for a heartbeat. He stepped closer, his charcoal gray thermal Henley pulling tight across his shoulders as he leaned into the car's radius. The smell of old iron, stale gasoline, and damp earth filled his senses, a pungent bouquet of decay that he found strangely intoxicating. His left forearm, where a faded vintage piston tattoo sat amidst a light dusting of silver hair, tensed as he ran a finger along the jagged edge of the driver's side door. The rust was thick and flaky, peeling away in brittle orange wafers that crunched like dry autumn leaves under his touch. Ting! Artie picked up a small brass hammer from his scarred wooden workbench, the metal feeling cool and substantial against his palm. He tapped the frame, listening for the hollow resonance of thinning metal. Each strike was a note in a somber melody, a diagnostic song that told him exactly where the rot had won and where the structural integrity still held firm. He didn't rush. Time in this workshop didn't follow the frantic ticking of a digital clock. It flowed according to the needs of the metal and the patience of the man. Setting the hammer down with a soft, resonant clink, Artie reached for a spray bottle of penetrating oil. The rhythmic hiss-shh of the nozzle echoed in the silence as he coated the seized bolts of the bonnet hinges. He watched the amber liquid seep into the parched crevices, a healing balm for the wounded iron. The sound of his own rhythmic breathing mingled with the distant rhythmic drip of condensation from the eaves outside, creating a meditative soundscape that centered his focus. Soon, Artie whispered, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that barely disturbed the air. He envisioned the end of the long journey, the way the light would eventually dance across curves of deep, lustrous emerald green, polished to a mirror finish. But for now, there was only the honest, gritty labor of the transformation. He picked up a wire brush, the stiff bristles scraping against the fender with a satisfying, abrasive rasp that signaled the true beginning. The first layer of history fell away as a cloud of orange dust, settling onto the dark, damp stones at his feet. The resurrection had begun.
The resurrection had begun, and the rasp of the wire brush became a steady, rhythmic pulse that filled the silence of the Cotswold evening. Artie leaned into the work, his navy canvas apron brushing against the jagged edge of the fender as he methodically cleared away decades of decay. Every stroke of the stiff bristles released a fresh plume of oxide, a fine ginger powder that shimmered in the amber glow of the overhead shop lights before settling on to his grease-stained boots. He worked with a singular focus, his thick-rimmed safety glasses catching the glint of the bare metal as it started to peek through the crust of time. He swapped the manual brush for a pneumatic sander, the tool's sudden, high-pitched whine echoing off the damp cobblestones. Through his heavy leather gloves, Artie felt the fierce vibration as the sanding disc bit into the surface. Zzz. The sound was crisp and biting, the transition from rough, pitted rust to the smooth, cold honesty of industrial steel. He moved the tool in small, deliberate circles, never rushing, allowing the machine to do the heavy
The filler
lifting
is spread
while
in a
his eyes
smooth,
searched for
thin
any
layer
hidden
across the
structural
fender.
fatigue. He paused to wipe the surface with a blue tack cloth, the fabric making a soft, sticky rip as he pulled it away. It was a tactile map of the car's past, every dent a story of a narrow lane, every patch of rot a relic of a forgotten winter. Artie adjusted his glasses, which had fogged slightly from the heat of his steady breathing. He reached for a heavy socket wrench, the metal feeling icy against his calloused skin, where the grease hadn't yet reached. He moved toward the front of the vehicle, where the chrome grille hung like a broken jaw. The sound of the tool, click, 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 provided a sharp metallic counterpoint to the distant rhythmic drip of moisture from the stone walls outside. With a sharp, satisfying crack, a stubborn bolt finally gave way, releasing the tension of 50 years. He dropped the bolt into a magnetic tray. The clink was a small note of progress in his mechanical symphony. His charcoal gray thermal Henley was damp with effort, while his indigo denim remained stiff. Chrome trim pieces were laid out on soft wool blankets, each piece labeled with a meticulous hand. Rusted fasteners soaked in glass jars of penetrating oil, tiny bubbles rising to the surface like a gentle fizz. The car was beginning to look skeletal, its proud lines reduced to a naked frame. Artie picked up a high-pressure air hose to clear the remaining debris from the chassis. The sudden, violent hiss of air sent a final cloud of dust swirling toward the dark oak rafters. As the air cleared, Artie stood back, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow with a greasy forearm. The faded piston tattoo on his arm seemed to flex as he gripped a heavy tin of metal filler. He tapped the lid with a screwdriver, and it popped open with a hollow metallic thok. The smell of the chemical resin was sharp, cutting through the heavy scent of old oil and damp stone. He looked at the hollowed shell of the car, no longer a wreck, but a canvas. He mixed the putty on a clean board, the plastic spreader making a rhythmic slip-slap sound against the surface. It was a methodical dance, folding the hardener into the gray paste until the color was perfectly uniform. The structural healing was next.
The structural healing was next, a process requiring Artie's undivided focus as he approached the driver's side rear quarter panel. With a firm grip on the plastic spreader, he pressed the putty against the metal, the schlick thrum of the tool echoing in the vaulted workshop. He worked in long, sweeping arcs, ensuring the filling bridged the microscopic valleys left by his previous welding. The gray paste clung to the steel, smoothing over the scars of decades-old corrosion. Every stroke was a calculated whisper, the silence of the Cotswold evening only broken by the occasional drip of condensation from the stone ceiling. Once the fillers had cured into a dull, chalky hardness, Artie reached for his sanding blocks. He didn't use power tools for this stage. He preferred the tactile feedback of his own palms against the curves of the chassis. The shh of 80 grit sandpaper began a rhythmic percussion. Fine gray dust billowed in the air, catching the amber glow of the overhead industrial lamps before settling onto his navy canvas apron. He periodically wiped the panel with a tack cloth, the zrip of the sticky fabric pulling away debris to reveal a surface as smooth as polished bone. Artie's weathered fingers traced the body lines, his eyes closed. He navigated by touch alone, feeling for the slightest ripple that might betray the final finish. His tortoiseshell safety glasses were coated in a fine mist of particulate, but he didn't need sight to know the metal was ready. He moved to the front wing, repeating the meditation. The grease lines in his knuckles were now highlighted by the pale dust, a map of a lifetime spent under hoods. The vintage piston tattoo on his left forearm flexed with every motion, a silent testament to his craft. Hours bled into the night. The dampness of the workshop seemed to recede as the car transformed from a patchwork of repairs into a unified, sleek form. He transitioned to finer grits, the sound shifting from a coarse rasp to a soft, silky hiss. By the time he reached the 400 grit paper, the car felt like satin under his calloused fingertips. He stood back, his heavy tan leather boots crunching softly on the fallen dust. The metal canvas was now primed, a uniform shade of slate gray that highlighted the classic, aggressive curves of the vehicle. He turned toward a heavy wooden workbench at the rear of the shop. Resting there, away from the dust, was a single, pristine gallon tin. He wiped his hands on a clean rag and approached it with a sense of quiet reverence. He hooked his thumb under the lid, and with a gentle, pressurized pop, the seal broke. Inside, the liquid was a deep, swirling vortex of emerald green. It was rich and viscous, shimmering with a subtle metallic flake that caught the light like a forest canopy in the sun. Artie picked up a wooden stir stick, dipping it into the cool, dark pool. The liquid glugged softly as he began to stir, the pigment folding into itself in hypnotic, shimmering ribbons. He checked the pressure on the compressor, the needle trembling slightly behind the glass face. The transformation was no longer about repair. It was about the rebirth of a legend. He felt the weight of the spray gun in his hand, the cool metal a familiar anchor against his palm. The air in the workshop grew still, expectant. It was time for the green to take hold.
It was time for the green to take hold. Artie adjusted his respirator, the rubber seal creating a soft, pneumatic whoosh as it gripped his face. Through the thick-rimmed tortoiseshell safety glasses, the world became a focused frame of steel and shadow. He squeezed the trigger of the spray gun. A fine, atomized mist of emerald green burst forth with a rhythmic, steady shh that filled the damp air of the Cotswold workshop. The first coat was a phantom, a light dusting that clung to the gray primer like morning dew on moss. Artie moved with a dancer's grace, his heavy tan leather work boots clicking softly on the uneven cobblestones as he circled the vehicle. He watched the light catch the wet edges, the pigment deepening from a translucent seafoam to a rich, mossy velvet. Each pass of the gun was deliberate, measured by the internal clock of a man who had spent 3 decades coaxing life back into cold metal. As the second coat flowed, the magic happened. The workshop lights reflected off the car's curves, turning the surface into a mirror of liquid glass. The deep, forest-toned emerald began to glow, revealing the hidden muscle of the car's fenders and the elegant sweep of its hood. It was no longer a collection of salvaged parts. It was a singular, breathing entity. The metallic flecks in the paint danced like tiny stars caught in a dark, swirling tide, providing a visual depth that seemed to go on for miles into the very heart of the steel. Artie paused, the silence returning as he released the trigger. He could hear the faint rhythmic ticking of the heater and the distant rhythmic drip of rain against the workshop's ancient stone exterior. He let the paint flash off, his weathered, grease-lined hands resting momentarily on his navy canvas apron. Underneath, his charcoal gray thermal Henley was damp, the sleeves pushed up to reveal the faded vintage piston tattoo on his left forearm, which seemed to pulse in the low amber light. Next came the clear coat. This was the final seal, the protective layer that would grant the green its legendary luster. The application was a delicate ritual. The heavy click-clack of the compressor kicked in, a low-frequency hum that vibrated through the stone floor. With the final layer applied, the car looked as though it were carved from a single giant gemstone. Hours later, the masking tape came away with a satisfying, crisp rip-scritch. Artie's fingers, lined with the persistent grease of his trade, carefully peeled back the crinkled paper to reveal the brilliant chrome accents he had painstakingly polished. The contrast was breathtaking, the icy silver brilliance against the deep, verdant green. He stepped back, his rugged, oil-stained indigo denim rustling as the smell of fresh lacquer and ancient stone swirled around his boots. He picked up a microfiber cloth, the fabric making a soft swish as he buffed a microscopic speck of dust near the headlight. The car sat proudly on the damp cobblestones, a resurrected masterpiece. The rust was a ghost, the decay a forgotten memory. Artie wiped his brow, a faint smile hidden behind his short, well-groomed beard. His salt and pepper hair, styled in a neat undercut, was damp with effort. In the stillness of the Cotswold night, the emerald legend stood finished, shimmering with a quiet, powerful life. He reached for the workshop's heavy iron light switch. With a final, metallic clunk, the room fell into darkness, leaving only the memory of the green glow burned into his mind. The transformation was complete.